So at the very end of the play, then, as Hamlet dies, he says a couple things that I just want to focus in on, because this vision of death that Hamlet is now forced to embrace is there's some, I think, very interesting things going on in the conclusion. So Hamlet says to Horatio here, Horatio is about to, like an old Roman vassal, pick up this cup that Hamlet has forced down Claudius's throat and drink it to die with Hamlet, as though Horatio here is a good foot soldier of his lord. We'll see that a little bit more when we get to Anglo-Saxon stuff a little later in our year. But there is this old ethic of duty that suggests that if your lord dies on the battlefield, you need to die on that battlefield as well. And so Horatio goes to pick up this cup, and Hamlet forbids him, tells him to put it down, and says, instead, here's the job for you, Horatio. If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity a while, and in this harsh world, draw thy breath in pain to tell my story. And so after Fortinbras comes in for the easiest takeover of a kingdom ever, I mean, he literally comes in with his soldiers and everyone's already dead. He doesn't have to do anything. And he's looking at Horatio like, what's up with all this stuff? Everyone's dead. The party's over before I even get here. And Horatio says, look, I'll tell you, and so shall you hear of cardinal, bloody, and unnatural acts, of accidental judgments, casual slaughters, of deaths put on by cunning and forced cause, and in this upshot, purposes mistook, fallen on the inventor's reeds, all this can I truly deliver. You'll notice how much of what Horatio says is action, about the actions and the judgments and the slaughters and the deaths and the mistimings and the mistakes. He says, I'll tell you all of that action, right? All the action that's taken place in the story. But if you have gotten to the end of a study of Hamlet, if you've watched the play, if you've engaged with the story, you know that the action of this story is way secondary to the other stuff that's happening. He doesn't say, hey, I'm going to perform for you Hamlet's soliloquy, to be or not to be, or I'm going to explain to you Hamlet's role as a hero and how he's gone from the difficulty of being forced to consider this revenge put on him by his ghostly father through this web of lies and manipulation to get to the place where he is now. Horatio calls him the sweet prince, dying here on the floor of the castle. Instead, all that Horatio can do is offer a story that is inevitably incomplete. It's a reduction of a life, and it reduces a life in its telling. And so a critic, Spencer, says, the great and frustrating achievement of this play, its most ingenious and tormenting trick, the source of its endlessly belabored mystery, is to persuade us that such a story might exist, while demonstrating its irreducible hiddenness. The only story Hamlet is given is that of an old revenge tragedy, which he persuades himself and us can never denote him truly, but it is a narrative frame that nothing, not even in action, will allow him to escape. The story of our lives, the play wryly acknowledges, is always the wrong story, but the rest, after all, is silence. What I think Spencer is suggesting here, and Horatio shows us in the story that he's about to tell, is that there's so much more complication to a human life than a obituary in a newspaper can sum up, than a Wikipedia page of a great man or woman's accomplishments can truly discover. And what this play suggests is that you and I are attaining this complexity within ourselves, these questions and this burning desire to know, and a huge just curiosity about life and the world and how to live. And that's hard to tell in a story. And that Shakespeare would conclude his story with Horatio's truncated, Spark Notes version of it, is suggestive of how rich his own narrative is. Shakespeare gives Hamlet the story that he truly deserves, and any other version of it is a reduction. Any other way of telling that story inevitably reduces it. Horatio doesn't get all those soliloquies. You and I do, and you and I have, in some ways, a greater privilege as readers of this play in having the full story. And if you can get a little meta with me there. So Fortinbras puts together funeral rites for Hamlet, which is just only interesting because nobody else in the play gets them. King Hamlet, of course, is cut off in the middle he doesn't get funeral rites. He doesn't have any of those things. Polonius's body is hidden in the castle. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern die on foreign soil. Claudius, Gertrude, and Laertes are still lying on the floor as the play ends. And Ophelia's funeral is interrupted by Hamlet. But Hamlet is carried out with soldiers, and there's going to be a sort of like rifle shot processional to honor this man who Fortinbras says would have been a great king if he had had the option. If his life had continued, Fortinbras thinks Hamlet would have been a good king. And there's mutual respect between Fortinbras and Hamlet by the conclusion of the play. All right, so a couple questions, because answers don't really seem to fit the story. I wonder if it's possible to say that Hamlet gets answers to the many questions that he has. Is Hamlet so plagued by his hesitancy that he can only act when his hand is forced, resulting in the deaths of everyone in the play? Does Hamlet produce catharsis? Do we feel a release of pity and fear as we come to the end of this study? And then perhaps more personally, well, how should we live knowing one day we will die? How do we answer this to be or not to be question that the grim specter hangs over all of us? And what does that mean for the dearness of life? Can any story, also thinking of some of the concluding questions Hamlet might cause us to think, can any story suitably account for someone's life? Is there a single story of your life that you could say accurately sums you up? And if there's not that for you, then what does that mean for your neighbor? And what does that mean for the person you're around? And so what are we witnesses to? Who are the Hamlets in our life that we can play Horatio to? In what ways can we provide a story that needs to be told, or call attention to a story that needs to be told? So I'll conclude our study of Hamlet with a poem from a novel by Leslie Marmon Silko, and it says this: "I will tell you something about stories," he said. "They aren't just entertainment. Don't be fooled. They are all we have, you see, all we have to fight off illness and death. You don't have anything if you don't have the stories. Their evil is might, but it can't stand up to our stories. So they tried to destroy the stories. Let the stories be confused or forgotten."